The conflict between Piltover and Zaun pertains to more than just a political struggle for sovereignty. It's also a clash of ideals, cultures, and yes, even champion designs. While one side has been founded on order, structure, protocol, and innovation, the other has persisted through adaptability, resourcefulness, individualism, and ambition. Both societies have made significant progress towards an identical goal, but through entirely different paths, so much so that despite sharing a symbiotic relationship with one another, Piltover and Zaun are portrayed as dark mirrors of each other, so alike and yet so different. It's this fundamental clash of ideologies that stands out to me, notably because the incongruity can be found in the way Piltover champions go about combat compared to Zaunites. Last episode we went over the genius behind Piltover's roster, filled with cast members whose kits tax their ability to think beyond their surface level use cases and to find ways to innovate new applications and strategies with the tools you have. It also emphasized the need for coordination, strategy, and a sense of order. Entering the next episode on Zaun, you'll find many aspects resembling Piltover, and yet there's still a distinct difference between them. In celebration of Season 2, which is now fully underway, for today I bring you the second half of the Arcane miniseries featuring Zaun, the land of the most chaotic and inconsistent champions in League of Legends. Buried within the canyons and valleys under Piltover, the city-state of Zaun is portrayed almost completely antithetical from Piltover. Rather than bright, positive colors matched by good weather, artisan architecture, and the appearance of a clean, lawful, and well-maintained civilization, Zaun is characterized by its grim, dark, and hostile appearance, not unlike the juxtaposition between Demacia and Noxus but taken to the absolute extreme. Certainly not a place you would want to wander into by accident. A polluted undercity notorious for unregulated, unethical, and illegal activity, where its biggest rule is that there are no rules. Consequently, years of reckless and unscrupulous industrialism and science resulted in massive pollution within the city, festering in all parts ranging from the upper levels of the city to especially the sump at the bottom. Scent pollutions become so pervasive and ubiquitous that the skies above Zaun have this perpetual distorted look to it, due in part to the incessant dumping of chemicals, radiation, and waste, colloquially referred to as the Zaun Grey, a substance that you'd be hard-pressed to even call air at that point. Fatally toxic to breathe for reasons I'm sure need no explanation. There's even a loading screen fact about it. It would be no exaggeration to call Zaun a dystopian society, one that's only tenuously maintained and upheld through mafioso tactics and a desire for self-preservation. While no declared governing body exercises political control over Zaun the way the Council oversees affairs in Piltover, there does appear to be a semblance of leadership known as the Chem Barons, a group of crime lords who each control various portions of the Undercity and collude with each other under the shared goal to profit from and exploit as much of the land as they can. As per expected, they rule over Zaun through corrupt ownership and control over most of its infrastructure, taking advantage of the loss of the land, or lack thereof, to make themselves as wealthy and powerful as they can be. Basically, the Undercity of Zaun has no government, instead groups of people who self-govern that happen to dubiously cooperate together. In essence, Zaun's a place where anyone can do anything, for better or worse. Its people have been forced to adapt and make the best with what they've got, leading to a surprisingly rich culture and history for all the wrong reasons. It is the rotten underbelly of Piltover after all, with its people often being treated like second-class citizens, especially from those who live in topside. Yet that doesn't stop many Zaunites from dreaming about one day reaching the surface to not have to spend the rest of their days living in squalor, pollution, crime, and exploitation, and they're willing to do anything to get there. One major distinction among Piltover's roster that you'll notice is entirely absent from Zaun is that while most of their kits encourage you to think about ways in which you can employ them to the fullest, there's an element of restraint on that innovation. Or to look at it differently, there's a limit to how high a Piltover's pressure can reach. Not to imply they're not strong, but a society built upon rules and regulations is bound to draw lines in the sand on what a person is allowed to do, demonstrated by Heimerdinger's objection towards Chase and Victor's borderline cavalier attitude towards progress and disbelief that there is such a thing as going too far too fast. No such limitations present among Zaunite champions, and they take full advantage of it. In my Piltover episode, I talked about while Piltover functions on a method to the madness-based approach, Zaun's the opposite, madness to the method. It makes sense after all, with there being no rules or regulations, its people are free to push and break the limits of science, technology, and of course, weaponry, evidenced by the rampant experimentation, manufacturing, and consumption of dangerous substances like shimmer and so on. What they lack in resources and wherewithal, they make up for with innovation of their own, just in a more twisted and questionable fashion. While Piltover's Hextech Zaun has Chemtech, enabling the latter to be more than a match for the former despite their many disadvantages. The gameplay of Zaunite champions embodies the ideology of its people, consisting of abilities that push the needle on what a champion is capable of. Being no stranger to hostile situations and tough circumstances, they're among the most deceptively adaptable and resilient champions in the game, flying dangerously close to the sun and perhaps even drawing strength from living life on the edge. Three key aspects of their gameplay stand out, the first of which being the presence of steroids or effects that substantially, albeit artificially, boost their pressure to levels that can allow them to take on and overpower opponents who in theory should have no trouble defeating them. Blitzcrank's Overdrive affords it a measurable boost in attack and movement speed, easily eclipsing other buffs of its kind. Renata's Bailout offers an identical boost whose duration can be extended multiple times over, giving it one of the longest potential buff durations in the game, along with of course the ability to effectively cheat death with its conditional revive mechanic. Another good example will be Warwick's Bloodhunt, supplying attack and movement speed buffs with numbers that far eclipse any other buff in the game. You may have also noticed that most of these buffs can have greater and longer lasting power under certain caveats. Having just mentioned, Warwick's Bloodhunt offers bonus attack and movement speed against targets below half health, but they can amplify dramatically against enemies in critical condition. So long as he's attacking an injured target, you will always have this buff active. Renata's Bailout can reach a maximum effective duration of upwards of 30 seconds. Sari's Lightning Crash has the ability to last for an indefinite period of time provided she's constantly attacking something. Jinx's Get Excited can last even longer than Renata's Bailout, given she can also obtain them via structure and epic monster takedowns. Meanwhile, you have champions like Singed and Dr. Mundo whose steroids last for a fair length of time, giving Zaun's uptime far exceeding that of most other champions, particularly their Piltover counterparts. Zaunites are infamous for becoming more threatening the longer the fight drags on for, either because they can outlast everyone else, or because they literally get stronger over time. Jinx's passive offers a stacking attack speed buff on takedown, meaning with every successive activation she becomes even more of a problem. Prior to Lethal Tempo, she was the only ADC in the game who could break the attack speed cap, allowing her to reach a level of power considered unnatural at the time. Sari's movement speed from her ultimate continuously ramps up over time, pressuring her opponents to end the fight quickly so as not to make her spiral out of control. I already went over how Warwick's Bloodhunt makes it more dangerous to fight if you're injured. Now, on a more macroscopic level, the majority of champions from Zaun grow in strength exponentially, making them some of the most powerful late-game champions in the game. Dr. Mundo not only becomes tankier over time, but with his DPS also being tied to how much health you stack on him, he starts to hurt a lot more. Second only to maybe Smolder with an ungodly number of stacks, Jinx holds the title for arguably the strongest ADC in the game at 6 items in a teamfight scenario. Singed becomes faster, tankier, and more obnoxious to deal with as he begins to pile on more and more items. Twitch is a close second to Jinx for his ability to blow up entire teams with a well-timed ultimate. This extends to virtually everyone in Zaun's roster. Every other Zaun's pressure can reach astronomical heights the longer the game drags on for. Probably coincidental and not related whatsoever, but I think it's a cool accidental portrayal from a narrative standpoint. Throughout Season 1 of Arcane, it becomes increasingly more evident that Zaun's becoming a legitimate threat to the safety and stability of Piltover, almost in the sense that Zaun's starting to outscale them, thanks to the absence of constraints on their ability to experiment and innovate compared to Piltover's more restricted and controlled industry and science. All this power with nothing keeping it in check might give off the impression that Zaun's champions are stronger than Piltover, but Cavalier science and technology doesn't always work the way you intend it to. Zaun's champions are just as prone to being completely useless as they are to being unstoppable due to the inherent fluctuation of their abilities. They certainly have an impact ceiling higher than most others, but they also have among the lowest floors of any champion in the game, as they're balanced around the possibility of attaining that ceiling. Twitch, Jinx, and Zeri at their normal level are among the weakest ADCs compared to those of the more stable baselines such as Ashe, Misfortune, and Lucian. Warwick's a pretty lousy fighter until his opponent drops below half HP. Same goes for Mundo, whose DPS is notably weaker than most other juggernauts. The reason Singe's Insanity Potion gives him so much free shit is to counterbalance the fact that he's a weak champion without it, hence why the video's title includes inconsistent. Zaunites are inherently volatile champions, but they embrace that volatility, making it a part of their identity. Calling back to Zaun's people being forced to toughen up considering the lawlessness of their homeland, many of its champions are capable of withstanding more pressure than they let on, while simultaneously capitalizing on opportunities to strike, especially if they spot a vulnerability or weakness in their opponent. In addition to raising their offensive pressure, Zaunites can also raise their survivability to respond against adversity more than others would be able to. Mundo's maximum dosage is most effective when he's at the brink of death, courtesy of the bonus health being based on missing health. Warwick's auto attacks begin to heal him below half health, and even more so if he's below a quarter. Renata and Zac both have ways to cheat death, not to mention Zac's incredible sustain from his passive. Singe's Insanity Potion grants armor, magic resistant health regeneration, alongside ability power and movement speed, an enormous amount of all of them, especially at rank 3. Echo's quarter break healing increases the more damage he takes. Meanwhile, there's another instance of artificially raising their defense with the prolific amount of shielding they have. Blitzcrank acquires a shield if he drops to low health by virtue of his passive. Echo can give himself a massive shield through parallel convergence. The list continues. Urgot's Disdain, Victor's Siphon Power, Zeri's passive back when she had one. I think you get the point. To take down a Zaunite, you might need to kill them twice to actually kill them. Moreover, you need to watch yourself if you are at low health. Zaunites are opportunistic by nature. They have to be to survive in the Undercity. As such, they're pretty good at destroying you if you so much as bleed in front of them. Echo's W passive allows him to deal missing health damage on his autos, implying he can snipe out a low health enemy very quickly. Jinx's super mega death rockets an attack you do not want to be in the line of fire of if you're 1 foot in the grave. Same goes for Urgot, whose fear beyond death is a literal execute if you get caught at low HP. Warwick's W is emphatically designed to screw over anyone who thinks they can get away with a sliver of health. In the chaos of battle, it's hard to keep that in mind, and Zaunates are well aware of that, bringing me to the third and final shared aspect among its members. Just as Zaun is a place defined by a fundamental lack of oversight and order, its champions find themselves at home when all hell breaks loose, having no shortage of abilities that work best against a discordant enemy team. While Piltover thrives on its allies, working in concert with each other to achieve an ideal outcome, Zaun thrives on sowing discord within its enemies, and then punishing them for it, reminiscent of how Piltover is trying to do everything it can to maintain order against Zaun, while Zaun's doing everything it can to create disorder within Piltover. Every single champion, even the supposed good one that is Janna, is most effective against an enemy team that's not prepared for them. Blitzcrank's self-explanatory, he's the champion for making picks. Dr. Mundo makes a beeline for the enemy backline, ignoring crowd control and being damn near impossible to kill, walking right past the enemy frontline and keeping the enemy carries preoccupied. Echo can search for an easy target, dash in on them, and one-tap them. Then, if the enemy team's not ready to lock him down, he can get right the hell out. Janna's Monsoon's one of the few abilities that disperses enemies in a non-uniform direction, throwing off the enemy team's momentum in the process. Jinx can gun down enemies one by one and get progressively stronger with each kill. Renata's handshake and hostile takeover literally turned the enemy team against each other. You could not be more chaotic than that. Singed. I mean, come on, it's Singed. The guy who statics all around the enemy team, flinging people around, gassing everyone to death, and being a general nuisance. Twitch can go invisible, ambush a target, no pun intended, then go invisible again for a clean escape if you don't respond to him immediately. Urgot's ultimate turns an enemy champion against their team as the execute comes with an AoE fear, not to mention that a chaotic teamfight means the enemy team may not pay attention to Urgot aiming for a low health champion and body block the ultimate for them. Warwick's Primal House spreads enemies out if they're too close to him, same goes for Zack's ultimate and Ziggs' satchel. Zaun might have the highest number of abilities that spread enemies apart, either by the threat of them like Renata or from the actual use of them like every ability I just mentioned. Divide and conquer, spread the enemy team apart from each other and then attack them while they're scattered. It's a constant battle between you trying to hold yourself together and them trying to break you apart. Between the two, I've always taken a greater interest in Zaun because there are so many more questions to ask, so much more beneath the surface. That morbid curiosity of wanting to know what goes on in the shadows compared to Piltover, where, politics notwithstanding, it's portrayed as a more presumably honest society. The contrast between topside and the undercity is one of the most fascinating aspects of League's mythos. Seeing the refined and organized champions of Piltover like Caitlyn, Camille, Heimerdinger, Seraphine, and Orianna, who work best when everything's coordinated, planned out, and controlled, comparing them to the grungy, rough around the edges champions of Zaun like Mundo, Jinx, Singed, Warwick, and Renata, who work best when nothing is working, really captures the difference in not just design philosophy, but also the idea that a society of thugs, criminals, and freaks who came from who knows where can still share an identity. That might explain why there are more Zaunate champions in League than Piltover. You can do a lot more with a region that has no boundaries than one that does. Additionally, unlike Ionia, whose champions are more prone to spiraling out of control, outside of maybe Zeri, I feel like every champion in Zaun's pretty well handled in terms of design. Almost incredible how a region where you'd expect to find the most abominable balanced nightmares who cheat with all kinds of weird stuff ends up ironically being made quite well for how diverse the roster is. You have tanks, mages, marksmen, fighters, controllers, slayers, and a couple other weird stuff in the mix. It's a big melting pot of freaks that give rise to one of the most intriguing regions in all of Runeterra. And also as a personal thing, I love how Zaun has a ton of monster champions. I mean, for crying out loud, we have a steam golem, a rat, a werewolf, a blob of green goo, a crab, a cyborg. The chaotic and inconsistent nature of the Undercity ends up being its shining virtue. That concludes my Lore to Gameplay episode on Zaun. By the time you see this, I believe Arcane will be halfway done airing, so I hope you guys are excited to see the finale as much as I am. In the meantime, if you enjoyed the video, a like and subscribe would be much appreciated. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my episode on Piltover if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.